All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to week number 4. Great to have everybody joining with us again live tonight. And based on the numbers, there's been a number of you that have been watching on the recorded presentations that we've got. So that's awesome and great. And remember that these recordings will continue to be available at those links. So you'll be able to access them, into perpetuity. We may look at even just putting them up open to the public on the CanBoat Nanaimo YouTube channel, but we will be discussing that as we go. So glad to see everybody connecting in with us. What we want to do tonight is to sort of do a couple of key things. We want to talk a little bit about the role of paper charts and your electronics and how we can effectively use all of these things together. And we've gone through in our earlier sessions about the fact that we need to have updated paper charts on board our vessel. There's legal requirements for that, but there's also functional requirements about, well, what happens if you lose your electronics? What happens if things just go south in a hurry and you need to switch on to your paper charts? And so because of that, we need to have the appropriate processes and the mechanisms and the tools in place. And we have been covering a lot of these tools as we've been going through the past 3 weeks of this seminar. And we will also be tonight reiterating the utilization of those tools coming at you, maybe sort of like, getting a bit from the fire hose and, trying to sort of take a drink in from there. So we want to do a little sort of quick review of what are the stages and to sort of highlight what are the tools that I use in those stages to try to bring things together. Now, again, just as a reminder, this is not the only way to do things, and the tools that I'm going to be showing and discussing with you tonight are not the only tools that can be used. There's a massive amount of great tools and resources that we have available to us because we're fortunate to live in such a wonderful location with lots of great boating. So there's a lot of great opportunities here. So we're going to be providing you with one particular viewpoint. That doesn't mean that if you use something else, that it's not going to be optimal and ideal for your situation as well. So let's get started with things tonight because we've got a few things that we want to be taking a look at as we work our way along. And I see we're already starting to get some questions popping into the chat. Remember that if you do have questions, please just reach out and type a Q in the entrance and let us know, because that makes it a little bit easier for me to find it as we're working way along. So if you type a Q in front and then the question and put everything together. And it is great to see so many people from both sides of the aquatic border, if you will, as well as, multiple provinces and across Canada. And I know that we do have people that are registered from even over in Europe, or those who are actually residing in Australia right at the moment. So, with the time delays and time change, I'm assuming that they may be watching this remotely. So, welcome to everybody, regardless of where you happen to be. So if we do have any questions from last week's session, let us know. And so one of the questions that we have had was, which weather model works best, in my opinion, for our speed or for our SOG area? It really depends. It depends on which part of the weather model that I'm looking at. If it's referring to predict wind, I tend to go with the default on there. It seems to sort of work mostly well for what I'm looking at. What I tend to try to do in a particular situation is, if I have made my plan and looked at things on the day on the basis of the aggregate default setting for predict wind as an example, and I find that there's a significant error in it, then I might sort of expand the predict wind app and take a look at what the variety of options are and see, well, who was a little bit closer to this. But again, you're going to get variety depending upon the specific situations. And we have so many unique microclimates along the coast. One of the things that I would really recommend is to, I know that there's a lot of CanBoat, squadrons that are doing very specific local weather presentations that have some excellent speakers that have significant experience that can really give you an idea more about your specific local area that is available. And so that's one of the things that can really help go a long way into filling in some of those gaps for you as far as getting that straightened out. Oh yeah, thanks. Straight to Georgia. I was trying to figure out what SOG was. There, these too many TLAs being used out there, i.e. 3-letter acronyms. Different weather models are better on a longer term process and more short term. And as we sort of mentioned, the Orca core is not great with regards to currents right now around here, but they do tend to be quite accurate for real-time, short-term elements with regards to wind. It sort of helps with that. So what we want to do tonight is to really take a look at just 3 key things, although there's a fair bit to cover in here. So we'll try to get things through as quickly as we can. And one of those is about the paper and electronic integration. And this is one of the things that I feel is really important. It is not just about getting the charts and folding them and putting them into your little folder and having them on board. Charts are designed to be utilized, and so we need to take a look at how we go about using the combination of charts and electronic in the most effective way, depending upon our particular circumstances. We then want to do a little refresh of the stages and highlighting what are the tools of choice, I guess, if you will, for myself at each of those different stages of the planning that we do. And then if we've got time, we'll take a look at putting it together for some more challenging waters up around Campbell River and heading up through Seymour Narrows to take a look at where some of this data may come into play and really impact some of the decisions of our plans as far as where we go. If we don't get through that, I will add a detailed presentation on that to the list of the additional tutorials that I will be putting together and posting on this site as well. So I will be posting additional things on this site even after the session is over. And I won't necessarily send an email out to everybody every time I put one thing up there. But when I've got a few things that have been added, we'll drop an email out to you and give you a notice that says, hey, there's a few more new cool things on that web page that's there. So make sure you save your password for that web page to be able to get in. Remember, the website for that is, where do we got here? So if we take a look at no, that's not what we want. We want the website. So let's go to Google Chrome. The canboat-nanaimo.ca/passage-planning/live or -live rather. And remember, the password to get in is CanBoat-Latitude is what we've got for that. So we did send that out as an update, as a reminder last week. So make sure where we go to sort of have a good, clear picture on what's happening on that side. So let's get back to the actual presentation on tonight and run through a couple of the key things. So as we sort of mentioned, we want to talk about how we integrate our paper charts and our electronic integration together. And there's really a number of different ways we can do it, but there's 3 general options that I find we can sort of put those together. And one of those is where we're not really looking at our charts as part of our planning stage, but we've got them available and we're making notations during our journey that we'll talk about so that if we do lose our electronic data, we have the quick ability to transfer to our paper in an emergency situation and a backup. If you haven't been keeping track of what you're doing and filling out your ongoing log sheet during the trip, then you may not have the information that you need to be able to quickly and easily move onto your paper charts for some form of reference that we do. And so that is what a lot of people might do. It's an easiest way to sort of go. The other one that we're going to talk about is where we do more of looking at our charts to do a basic preliminary plan, figure out our headings and our distances and our times perhaps for our daily journey using our charts, and then have that on our planning sheet so that we can easily transfer that to our chart plotter. And so this is where all chart plotters will have the ability for you to manually enter a waypoint in, a destination that you want to be going to. So if you've done your plan for the day, all laid out on paper, then you can simply go, okay, we're approaching our next waypoint, and you can look down and say, okay, our plan says we now need to go to 49 degrees, and you can simply enter that into your chart plotter as your next stop along the way, and then you're good to go. You can also manually enter all of that in, from an entire journey in a route, putting in each waypoint at the beginning. It depends on how much time you've got before you're leaving the dock as you go. And then there's the more tedious but more accurate aspect of doing the paper plan, where you're like, we're prepared for worst case scenario, and you do your full detailed paper plan, and then you simply follow that exact plan that you did with your instruments used for the execution. So let's talk about each of these three stages in just a little bit of a brief detail. When you're looking at using your electronic tools as your primary and only using your paper charts as a backup, there's really three steps to take a look. And one of those is to plan your trip using your electronic tool of choice, whether that's Garmin Boating, Aquamaps, Orca, whatever. And so we're going through and plotting the steps and working our stages, and then transferring that data from our electronic planning sheet onto our daily planning sheet. That's our daily prep sheet that we've got the information laid out. So what are we expected or planning to do on this day? And then, because you've created that in either Garmin Boating, Aquamaps, or Orca, depending upon the type of chart plotter that you've got and the electronic tool that you're using, you may have the ability to simply go through and send it out directly into your chart plotter. And so by doing that, you could create your entire route, your entire waypoints, everything all sorted out, and then you just simply send it and it puts the entire path on your chart plotter with all the waypoints intact. This was one of the things that there are ways to do that using the cards, or if you've got a connection between your devices, through Bluetooth, you can do that through Garmin Boating onto a lot of different chart plotters. As we mentioned in one of our earlier presentations, for the last few months, Orca has the ability to do that and send it simply directly to a Raymarine chart plotter. That was one of the big things that Raymarine has been announcing and promoting over the last little while, is you can do your whole plan on Orca and just simply wirelessly send it directly to your chart plotter. Now, once you've got that planning that you did through your navigation app, you can then simply follow that pathway and execute that trip on your chart plotter. And during the trip, you would transfer the data to your actual log sheets while you're underway, because we might make a specific plan, but it might get adjusted because we go, oh, there's some great wind over here. I want to put the sails up and go for a bit of a sail, and then I'll eventually get myself back on my track, particularly if you were using Garmin boating as your planning tool. Then, maybe you've got that set and it's taking you on what you would be doing if you were in a power boat, but it's not necessarily replicating the path that you're taking on a sailboat. So you want to be making sure that you're making those notations and adjustments. We'll talk about that more in a minute. And if you do lose, apologies with this typo, if you do lose your electronics, you can then simply use your sheets to move the data that you've been collecting on your log sheets for the dive and transfer them to the charts that hopefully you've pulled for the day and have in your waterproof case in the cockpit. As I mentioned, that's what I do, is I always figure out what are the charts that I need for my daily plan, have them in my waterproof case, and they're just sitting folded up in my cockpit. So if there's ever a need to go to them, or if I want to take a look at them for some reason for more detail, or if passengers on my boat just want to sort of take a look and see where they go, we've got them handy. So that is where making sure you're using your daily planning sheet and your trip log sheet, those two things are going to allow you to easily migrate from your electronic tools to your paper tools if you have a catastrophic electronic failure. Now, the reason there was some discussions in previous weeks about what should you be using as your setting on your navigation tools, and because some of them have the ability to choose between two and where we go. Now, one of the key things is that if you've got the navigation instruments on board your boat set for magnetic, all right, if you've got them set for magnetic, then you can simply use your deviation card to migrate those magnetic headings to a compass heading and make them put on your planning and log sheet. If you need to go from magnetic to true, that means that you've had a catastrophic failure. So you're breaking out your paper charts, and to go from your magnetic heading to true headings, you're just simply going to use the compass rose on the appropriate chart that you're using at that point in time. We have had a question come up in the chat saying, can somebody remind me where the video is about folding the paper charts? That was sent out via email a few days ago. So if you did not get that, we will be posting it on the site, so it will be there as well. But I haven't had a chance to do that because pretty much after I made it, I've been out on the boat for the weekend, so I haven't had much of a chance to get things updated. So it was sent out by an email with a reminder about the website of where to locate things, as well as the password for that. So hopefully you've got that email. If not, check your inbox, or I will be posting it onto the preparation page coming up as well. Now, the alternative, and sort of like the happy middle ground, if you are wanting to make sure that you keep your paper skills sharp and that you know how to utilize your navigation using a paper chart, is you can use your paper chart for a rough preliminary plan where you can figure out, well, what's going to be my travel line, where I'm going to go, what are going to be my headings. And remember, because these are from the chart, they're going to be true unless you use the compass rose to convert them to magnetic. What is the variation for that? And you're going to get that from the compass rose on the particular charts. And one of the things that's really important with regards to compass roses, you need to make sure that you're using the compass rose that is closest to the part that you're navigating on a chart. All charts are going to have multiple compass roses, which, depending upon the layout of the chart and the scale of the chart, the variation may be slightly different between, because if you're going east or west across that chart, you're going to have a situation where the difference between the magnetic North Pole and true north is going to be changing as you move from east to west, just like it is where the variation is going to be very different in BC versus Lake Ontario or other areas around the way. We can also, as we've got that part laid out on our chart, figure out what our distance is going to be using our calipers and what our time is going to be able to go through and do that particular leg. And we can then transfer those notations from our chart when we're moving from one chart to the next. So we're just going to flip over here for 1 second and give you and show you an example of this. So this is where, if we're taking a look at a particular plan that we've done, so in this case, this is showing us where we were starting in the Maple Bay Yacht Club. We had our movement to our first waypoint, which we've labeled as waypoint 1. And then as we go up, we've got waypoint number 2, and then we've got a notation that we're moving to chart 3463. And this is where, depending upon the detail that you want for a particular area, in this case, we went and used an approach chart for our start because we were very familiar with the Maple Bay area and the Maple Bay Yacht Club. So we didn't need to use the harbor chart to get the really tight, close-in detail that we would have of that area. We were comfortable with starting our initial path on the approach chart, but because we were going to be doing a long run going out through Porlier Pass, we wanted to switch over onto our coastal chart. That was all we were needing for that long main path journey. So what we did is we made a notation, and at waypoint number 2, we said we need to move on to chart number 3463. And so then, if we take a look at 3463, let's flow this around the right way. There we go. That's a little bit better. So if we move on to 3463, this is the point where we see our waypoint number 2. That's fine. Where we go. Yeah. Our waypoint number 2 was where we transferred, and we see that there's 3462. And so because Grave Point is on both of those charts, that was where we transferred our latitude and longitude from the 1 scale chart onto the main chart that we were going to be using for our journey. And then because it was a fairly clear path, we marked our notations and we worked our way along, putting our various waypoints in, but we have Porlier Pass coming up, and a coastal chart is definitely not going to provide the detail necessary to give us a proper navigation plan and what is the right path that we should take through Porlier Pass. And so that's where we make another notation at the top there that you can see. But from that waypoint number 6, we're now moving to an additional chart. And that's where we then move to our charts. Oops, not that one. This is the one we want, the one for Porlier Pass. So we've got our notation on Porlier Pass, and so we can see that the X that we're transferring over from our previous chart is going, and we're on 3463. So we're able to find a nice, clear, straight line path through Porlier Pass in order to make sure that we're passing any of the potential risks that we've got in that area, depending upon the tide that we were going to have in the current. And then we follow that through. And as we get to waypoint number 7 up here, we're saying we're going to go back to chart number 3463. So this is not going through and putting all your notations on your chart and putting all of your headings and all of your speeds and everything all laid out on the chart, but it's laying out your preliminary waypoints in such a way that you can figure out your distances, you can figure out your latitude and longitudes for each, you can estimate then your times for each of those legs, and more importantly, what your headings are, because you want to make sure that you're using the compass rose that is closest to where you are to note what the variation change is going to be going from true to magnetic in that particular case. So that's one of the ways that you can sort of utilize your charts, make sure that you're familiar with what sort of obstructions or things you may be running across, and then transfer that information onto your actual plan as you're going along. And we'll take a look at that. The third option is to go full scale, old school, and do a full detailed paper plan indicating your speed made good as you're underway, your course made good, where you're doing your fixes, where you're doing your dead reckoning, what those headings are. So really where you would go to once you've had that catastrophic failure. I don't know a whole lot of people that might go through doing all of this just for a day out on the water, but it is very good to sort of keep your skills up and keep your knowledge up on how to do all of this, because electronics are electronics and sometimes they may not work effectively for you. So there are a couple of great programs that CanBoat has available to sort of help you either learn how to do more passage planning on your charts and to be going through and working your way along. The first would be the BNBH, the Basic Navigation and Boat Handling course, or the one going beyond that, getting into a lot more detail, would be the Seamanship and Coastal Navigation course. You can get details on both of these either from your local CanBoat squadron, such as us here in CanBoat Nanaimo, or you can go to canboat.ca/course-calendar, and it will show you all of the different options that are there as well. Now, Nautic Ed has two very, very detailed online courses that you can do to help bring the theory to what you're looking at. The Coastal Navigation course is $39 US for a 10-hour online program. That will probably take you a little bit more than 10 hours. The one disadvantage of that is at the moment, the charts that they're using and the examples that they're using are US-based charts because of the fact that they are primarily at the moment, a US-based agency with regards to where their content is being created. We are working with them to create updated Canadian content with Canadian charts as an examples for that, but that will be forthcoming at a later date. But the concepts are all the same, but there are those variations and differences with regards to the nuances between US charts and Canadian charts. And remember, in the United States, it is virtually very challenging to be able to find paper charts anymore because they have gone full scale electronic. And that's where the want to enhance your electronic navigational skills and ability is they have a 5-hour electronic navigation course that goes through all of the key things, and that's $25 US. So you got a couple of different options to help you stay up to date with regards to bringing your paper charts together with your electronic tools. So any questions about the paper chart integration with the electronic tools that we talked about? Just type a Q into the chat. And if the timing's a little bit off, if you joined us a bit late and you're watching this on a bit of a lag, I will come back to the questions at some point if there's ones as we're working our way along. I don't see anything popping up in there, but just one of the things to have a quick little comment. Sorry about that. Hit the wrong one. A quick little comment is there's a lot of different tools on the market, and my recommendation is to, try different tools, not necessarily go out and buy them, but if you can do a session or meet with somebody that's got certain tools, and you can find what's going to work best on the different types. So there's a wide range of different calipers, some that are going to be a little bit stiffer and a little bit easier to make sure that you're not adjusting on the adjustments that are there. That's going to be a key piece to help you get really accurate distance as you're going along and taking a look at that. So there's also, you've got the parallel rules, which I don't know about you, but I have always struggled to make sure that the parallel rules doesn't really go anywhere. But, it always sort of moves a little bit. That's why my sort of go-to preference for moving to the compass rose to get a heading, if I'm using the compass rose on that, this is the small Weems and Plath tool. And all you do is you line it up on your route, and then you put your hands on it and just roll it to the compass rose. And these lovely little rollers, they don't twist and slide. So it's really freaky, and it's a great little tool, as well as it's got a lot of other aspects. So this is their compact parallel plotter, but there's a larger version as well, depending upon what you want to use. And then one of the tools that I sort of recommend that a lot of people have is there's all sorts of different names for them because they've been around since World War II and pilots have used them forever. And that's a simple little small cockpit plotter. And it's called a cockpit plotter because they were for in the cockpits of airplanes, because you don't got a lot of space in an airplane cockpit. So this would allow you to easily utilize this to be able to get your location. It also works great for transferring your celestial nav sites onto a chart as well. And it's compact enough that I'll use this one a lot when I'm doing any chart work on the little table that I've got in my cockpit, because it's not a big table. So having the compact tools is a great way to help me go through and do that. And of course, there's all kinds of typical plotters out there that can help you do that without the rows. And that's where we've got our Portland plotter or the other plotters that are available. And they all do the same thing, but some of them may do it a little bit faster and a little bit easier, depending upon your particular style and what you're sort of working with on there. Okay, so one of the we've got a couple of questions popping in, so let's take a look at some of those. So one of the first ones that Kay had was, how do we know the deviation of our own boat? Well, you have to figure that out. You have to do a calculation, and we did post, I believe, a deviation card template, what we've got, and as you sort of take a look at that, if you don't have one for your own boat, now there's a couple of key things. If your boat has a very high-end binnacle compass, some of the higher-end binnacle compasses can be professionally calibrated. There is a couple of places, or at least one place over in Vancouver that does that, where they can actually, using adjustment screws or placing magnets around the compass, they can help to use and adjust for the electronic issues that are going on. Not all boats have adjustable or compasses on board that they can deal with that. Mine doesn't. So one of the ways that you could do it is if you take your boat out, preferably when there's no current and no wind, so a very calm, flat day. If you get your boat and you have your instruments on your boat set for magnetic, and you get yourself going on a heading of 000. So if you're going on that heading of 000 and you're just very slow and you're pointing in that heading, take a look down at your binnacle compass and see what is the heading that is showing up on there, and then just write that into your template, and then switch to 010 and do the same thing, and then go to 020. So every 10 degrees on your template, you're making a notation of, if my magnetic north on my instruments is saying 10 degrees, when I look at my binnacle compass, what is it saying? And it's important that you do that for the full 360, because it is going to vary. Because depending upon the relationship between the magnetic north of the compass, where the magnet north is trying to rotate around, and where the electronics are in respect to that, and how much of an impact it's having, you're going to get variations. In my case, it's like almost from like -1 to +10, depending upon the heading, to make the change from magnetic to compass. And so that's an important part to always sort of do, and it's a good thing to do on an annual basis, or definitely have to do anytime you update your electronics or add anything around that binnacle compass that may be metal, because that's going to impact where it's pointing to. And so that way there, you create that card and have it on board your boat. What I do is I have one that's down in my nav table, but I also have one that I have laminated that is always with me in my cockpit, right behind my log sheets that I'm filling in as we're underway during the day, so that I can immediately transfer my magnetic north going over from to that. Now, we've had a question here regarding the compass rose. We need to adapt for magnetic drift, so the numbers are not really going to be up to date. They're not, but it's the best that we can absolutely do. And I know Tom made a comment that the rose on the chart will tell you what the annual change in variation is, but that annual change in variation is not, it's static. It's saying that it's changing this month per year. But the reality is, and I'll find a presentation that I've got that shows where magnetic north is moving, because by 2030, it's going to be in northern Russia. And so your charts that are saying your variation is changing this many minutes per year, it's actually not linear. And the pace of change has cranked up significantly. There's a really great graphic. I believe it was from the NOAA site. I'll try to find that and post that on. So all we're doing is we're trying to get the best estimate that we can and be as accurate as we can. Yes, there's going to be, it's going to be out because we don't have a fixed variation. It's not going to be changing linearly, and it doesn't work that way. But that's the best way that we can manage it at the moment, and where we have it on the charts to be able to go through and take a look at that side of things. So, we're just trying to get close. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're out a degree or two on the compass, most people are not going to be able to hold a navigation within 1 degree on a magnetic binnacle compass over any sort of distance anyway. So we're sort of utilizing these tools in combination with our dead reckoning, looking at our charts, going, where's the island? If we do have our depth sounder still available, having an indication from our depths to help us identify our position depending upon what went and where things go. We had a question about demonstrate how auto tide relates to the auto depth numbers on Orca, Navionics, or Savvy Navi. So what happens is the depths that you've put in your vessel details and your vessel information is going to be used by the planning tools to find a safe passage. So when you're setting up your boat, into the tools, and this is one of the important first steps that we mentioned, you've got to make sure that you put exactly what the distance is from the surface of the water to your keels, so we know what is the depth that you're going to be dealing with, so that we can put that in, and they can say, okay, many of the chart plotter, or the chart planning tools rather, will also ask you how much safety margin do you want to have, either as a feet or a percentage. So how shallow do you want to get to? What is your willingness to sort of tie in on that? And so it's the depths that are being shown on the chart plotting tool are not going to change based on the draft of your vessel. The automated route that the planning tools will take your boat through will vary based on the draft of your boat that you have put in to the boat information, as well as the safety margin that you have identified that you want to make sure that you're going from there. So we've had one here, another one that says, now that you have the Orca core, are you integrating that with your suite of Raymarine products, including my autopilot? Absolutely. So right now on my boat, everything I've got, with the exception of my depth, speed, temperature, which is an Airmar, all my other stuff is Raymarine. So my radar, my AIS, my chart plotter, all my other instruments are all Raymarine. And so with the Orca core, what you do is the Orca core can either connect to an NMEA 2000 network, if that's what you've got on board your boat, and then it splits into the CTOC NG that Raymarine has, if it's a modern Raymarine session, or you can get an adapter to basically plug the CTOC or the NMEA 2000 plug on the Orca core directly into the CTOC NG network. And then what that does is that brings all of your Raymarine electronics directly into your core as well. And so Tom had a question, says, so I have electronics set to magnetic, then I proceed at 10, 20, etc., and record what the compass is saying. Yeah, and so that's where you fill in the compass reading on the template, and that's going to give you an idea on when you have a magnetic heading of 10, what is the compass heading going to be? Now, what you need to do for any compass card, because there's only so much accuracy you can get to, is when you take a look at your compass card, and we'll have a compass card coming up later in the presentation, and you take a look at it, then you can say, okay, what is the distance between this for 10 degrees magnetic? It's changing 14 degrees over here. So then you can start to extrapolate and say, okay, if it's 13 degrees magnetic, approximately what is it going to be onto that side of things? David is saying that Aquamap seems to not retain your boat fuel or your fuel consumption per hour. I'm not sure if you've got the update, David, it should save it. Drop me an email off channel and I'll take a look and double check on that, but it should save that. But it's always a good idea, based on what David's mentioning there, that before you go and start trusting your plan and things, is just take a quick look at your settings and make sure that what you're seeing is what you were expecting, and that information is still going to be accurate as you go. Okay, perfect. Great. Well, glad to see a lot of questions coming in. If we have more, just put them in and we will get back to them in a minute, because now what we want to do is to go through and provide you just with a brief refresher of the steps and stages that we've talked a lot about over the last 3 weeks. But because we've talked about so many different tools that we would use at those different stages, trying to make life a little bit easier to help people figure out, well, which stage, what do I use at what particular stage, which app am I using as we go. So let's take a look. When we're doing our preliminary planning steps, so this is where, depending upon whether you're doing a single day trip or you're planning a multi-day journey, would depend on whether you would use the single day planning sheet or if you would start off initially with the spreadsheet templates that I provided you back in week number 1 in both numbers or Excel format. So when you're doing this initial preliminary plan and saying, well, where am I going to go? Your general go-to tool for that is going to be your navigation planning tool of choice. All right. So I'm not saying use Navionics, Garmin Boating, use Orca, use Savvy Navi. I'm leaving that up to once you've had the experience of working through these different tools and trying them to see which ones are going to work best for you. Use whatever your navigation planning tool of choice is to think about your rough route, to sort of go, well, okay, if I leave, you're going to think about, well, how much do I want to travel in a particular day? If I'm going to be doing overnights, where do I want to do that? Obviously, if you're heading north, there's going to be certain spots where you're going to be able to pull into a marina. There's going to be certain spots where it's going to be availability to drop your anchor and hang out. So you want to make sure in your planning that you're thinking about, well, where are we going to be doing stops? The other thing that I do in that preliminary planning step is as I'm taking a look and my Navionics or whatever I'm doing, I'm looking at, is there a choke point in there or a pass that I'm going to have to be concerned about what I'm dealing with regards to current? And so this is where in the example on the screen, you see that in Thursday, there's 2 lines in the spreadsheet for Thursday. The first line is getting me from Nanaimo to Dodd Narrows, and then the second line is getting me from Dodd Narrows to Salt Spring, because I need to be knowing when my, slack current is going to be at Dodd and what my window is going to be and how long it's going to take me to get from Nanaimo to there to determine when do I need to be leaving Nanaimo by. So what's going to be my departure time as I go. So I always put any of those choke points where I'm going to be looking at things. So I would put Seymour Narrows in there. If I was going to be going north, I would want to make sure that I had that as a separate stop on my passageway. So those are the types of things you're going to take a look at just initially to sort of say, I'm going to go from A to B, B to C, making sure that the time for getting there is going to be in. And that's where once you figured out where you're going to go, then you need to put together some of the key route planning factors that are going to come into play. So what is the distance of that leg from point 1 to point 2? And doing that in the navigation tools of choice are going to give you, if you use the automatic plan, an estimate of how long is it going to take you to get there? What is the distance that it's traveling? What is the time it's going to take? And how much fuel are you going to use? And so you can then transfer that distance and the time in those first columns on your chart. The fuel I put in the back column, which is on my comments, where I try to add up all the tool together. And then the next section is where I want to be making notation of nautical twilight, sunrise, sunset, and nautical twilight at the end of the day. This is so that if I'm in a charter boat, I know that I have to be operating between sunrise and sunset. So I know what my parameters are. If I'm in a personal boat and I'm comfortable with going where I can see definition, it's not night, I know that I can go between nautical twilight to nautical twilight. So if I'm going to be arriving at a destination late, I need to know what my window is going to be. But again, if I'm comfortable and my vessel is equipped for night sailing and I'm properly trained and have the right tools and all the lights and everything on board my vessel, then I might not need to pay any attention to that because I might want to do a part of a night passage. Maybe I'm going to leave at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, out of Telegraph Cove to head down to Blind Channel as an example. And then in the next section, just going back to the last piece, you'll notice that on the example that we've got on the screen, that we have nautical twilight at the morning and sunrise in that top line. And then in the bottom line, in the second line, we've got sunset and nautical twilight. Because remember, that's where we were concerned about going from Nanaimo to Dodd Narrows was our first line. And then we're going from Dodd Narrows through to Salt Spring. And so that's where we've got, there's no need for us to put sunset in Nanaimo because we're hopefully not going to still be in Nanaimo at sunset. But we need to know for sunrise because that's our departure from that point. Because when you're dealing with things where you may have that choke point in between, like at Dodd Narrows, then we've got that. Then the last column that we see on the screen, this is the one that may take your most time to put together because this is where we want to be cognizant of what are the tides and currents that we're going to be encountering along that particular leg of our trip. So this is where we would be putting in and saying, what is our slack at Dodd Narrows? What is it ranging? Is it slack on a, is the water level dropping? Is the water level rising? Where are we at with things on the speed? So are we looking at the current and figuring out where that window is? When we're looking at things such as Nanaimo, or when we're looking at things such as our destination, particularly if we're going to be anchoring our boat, we need to make sure we're noting what the tide is going to be, not just when we arrive, but also what it's going to be during the night and as we go. So you're going to want to be making sure that you're aware of how much the tide is going to change from when you anchor until the next morning when you're lifting your anchor. So is it going to be rising? If so, how much? You may need to make sure that you put out enough scope on your anchor line for that highest tide that you're going to reach during your journey there. And if you're going to be there for 2 or 3 days, then you may need to take a look at what are the tides going to be over those 2 or 3 days to make sure that your anchor scope is for the highest tide that you're going to have, to make sure that as the tide rises, you've still got the sufficient holding capacity on your anchor line. You're also going to want to take a look and see how low the tide is going to be to make sure of 2 things. Number 1, is our boat going to run aground if the tide goes out? So how much depth do you have, in my case, below my keel, because I'm a sailboat? But you also have to be cognizant of another thing. If your tide is going down and your vessel may be, if you've got perhaps, say, a stern tie, is the stern of your vessel going to be moving too close to shore that you may be getting into a grounding situation? I may have mentioned it in one of our earlier sessions, but I was coming back from Prince of Louisa one time and we were anchoring in the Harmony Islands, and all the main spots and all the best spots were taken because we were kind of late getting there. And so the one place we were able to get really good solid holding was with our anchor on the slope of the bottom, and then get a really good tight stern tie. But that put us very close to shore there, and we were going from a very high tide to a very low tide. And so I knew by looking at the distances and looking at the way the tide was going to change and the scope that I had out, I knew that I wasn't going to make it the night. So I had to set my alarm for 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was on the day. And I got up and took in the scope that had caused me to move much closer to shore than I would have been comfortable with to bring things out. And the scope could be taken in. I could bring in some road because my scope would be the same as it was and what I needed. So I was able to take up some of the road, bring it back on board, move my stern away from shore. But that's only going to happen if you know exactly what's going to be going on with the tides for the duration that you're there. So the tools that I use when I'm looking at my tides and currents and what's going to be happening is I'm going to be using ports and passes to take a look at both of those for what we've got. For current, I'm going to be taking a look much more specifically at predict current, at looking at the app and the details that are there. I'll also be taking a look using Garmin Boating or Navionics to see what it's showing as the current on those passes. And I'm also going to look at the Canadian tide and current tables that I've downloaded from the federal government site that I've got it. And one of the big things that you want to do within this column or section of your plan is this is where you would be noting any reference stations. So this is where, as an example, on the plan example that's on the slide for Ganges Harbor, we've got the notation that high and low tide, there you can't find Ganges Harbor for that. But if you go to Fulford, Ganges Harbor is one of the reference stations. And so I've made the notation that for Fulford low, how much is the change in tide and what is the change in when it's going to be happening as far as time. And so we're making note of that so that we know where our math came when we calculated our high tide and low tide and then our high tide again. So you want to make sure you're putting enough highs, lows, and highs to cover you for the time you're going to be on that particular spot and be needing to sort of be utilizing that. So those would be the main tools that I would use to complete that part of the preliminary plan. And then the next step on that planning sheet is figuring out what charts I need to have on board. And we went through and we showed you how to use the interactive chart index on the Canadian government site to figure out what are the coastal approach and harbor charts that you need to have on board. And you also need to go through the updating process and make sure that all of those charts are current and up to date and that there's no notice to mariners updates that have occurred since you've last updated your charts. Now, once we've determined where we're going to be going and where we're going to be stopping as an overnight, we need to sort of think about, are we going to be at the dock? Are we going to be on the hook? What is our overnight stay situation? And if it's going to be at the dock at a marina, have we made a reservation, particularly during the summer if it's going to be a busy time? Some places, particularly even up north, they have a certain percentage of their dock that they will allow to be reserved. And the balance is a first come, first serve. So there is a first mover advantage of being able to get in there and get your spot early. So what we're going to be looking at once we've decided where we're going to be is looking at what resources there are available in that area. Do we have access to fuel? Do we have access to topping up our water tanks? Do we have access to garbage disposal? And if so, is it at a cost or is it free? Do we have access to a pump out? And where might that pump out be in case we need to get rid of our black water tank? Can we re-provision? Is there groceries available? If we're sick of our own cooking, is there dining available at a restaurant? Is there laundry available, depending upon how long your trip is planning to be? Unless you've got a very nice large boat that's got its own laundry on board, you might want to use a washing machine periodically along that trip. So where is the point that you're going to have that? And I always put these on my preliminary planning sheet because you want to know when is the next time you're going to be able to top up your water tanks. When is the next time you're going to be able to top up your fuel tanks? When is the next time you're going to be able to get rid of garbage? So you can make sure that you're taking advantage of it so that you may not have a lot, but you may want to definitely get rid of it if it's available there, if it's going to be a longer period of time. So this is where there's a lot of online resources. Local guidebooks are going to be available to help you find that. The websites of the marinas or speaking to people in that area will be a big way to go through. Now, the next part is one that we talked about, but we didn't really spend a lot of time on. And that is identifying any recommendations or concerns for transiting that area. Your first and most important place to go to once you've got that plan is to go into the appropriate sailing directions and look at all of the recommendations and all of the details that the Government of Canada has decided that you need to know this stuff, but we weren't able to put it all on the paper charts. So this is where you're going to get a lot of the details that you're not going to have on your charts, and you're also not going to have on your chart plotter. So these are going to be really key things, identifying, areas that have a lot of wire that you don't want to drop your anchor in a particular side, or, concerns with regards to how rapid the current is going to be on the flood or the ebb, and being concerned about that. You also can access the local guides. There's Wagoner that has a lot of good detail, not just about the areas, but details about shopping, things you may want to go and see, sites that you want to see. If you're looking at really good anchoring details and specifics of where to go to, one of the ones that I find is extremely valuable is the Salish Sea pilot guides. I really like the way that they present their information. And let's take a look. I'll flip over to here and we'll change over to, there we go. And so if we take a look here, this is for Seymour Narrows, and we're seeing all sorts of really good detail in here where it's indicating all the information about the cables, showing us that flood is coming from north to south through Seymour Narrows, where the old rock was blowing up, and where you've got the exact locations of where things are, where there's wreck dive sites that are available. As we take a look at the information, all of our depth details, as well as this is where they talk about all of the key information, talking about ripple rock that's there and how things were formed, and specifically concerns that you have to be with respect to the speed of going through, and what you've got as far as the speed going southward at 16 knots and transiting at slack. And we've got a little notation here where it talks about the drying flats that are going to be there. So anything that merits more detail, they're going to put little numbers on to sort of say, for example, in this case, when we're looking here at Stag Island and Doe Inlet, it says there it's a well-protected anchorage at the south end of Gowland Harbor, as well as off the south shore of Doe Inlet and Stag Island, and tells you what type of holding you're going to get and what depth you're going to have. So you can get a lot of really good detail from these local guides to try to bring all this information together for you. And so, I like the Salish Sea guides personally. Those are what I use. And I like them because they're digital, so they come through really nicely on my my tablet, and they always have an annual upgrade so that you're not paying the full rate, but you get a very favorable rate to make sure that you're upgrading your guides and getting any new information or any updates that they've provided. But you definitely want to make sure that you're looking at the sailing directions, and you want to be looking at it not just for your destinations, but you want to be looking at it for descriptions along the way, because there may be places where you plan to stop for lunch, or you're thinking about anchoring, or you may have to go to a bailout. So you want to read through the sailing directions information that is relevant for your particular day's travel or journey that you've got. That's going to be a big factor that you do. Now, that's the stuff that I go through if I'm doing a multi-day planning trip. If I'm just going to be going and planning my day trip, or if I'm going to be planning tomorrow, say sitting at the anchor and I'm like, okay, what are we going to do tomorrow? Well, I'm going to also need to do these daily planning steps when I'm doing a multi-day trip. I'm going to have one of these planning sheets for each individual day that I've done. And so your first step is going to be to transfer the daily information from that planning sheet onto the daily planning sheet. We have provided this for you on the website as well to be able to download and update. I believe it's the fillable PDF version. I think I made sure that I got up there. If not, somebody let me know by email and I'll make sure that I correct that. So this is where I'm going to be putting in the nautical twilight, the charts that I need, the coastal, the approach and harbor, so that I can easily pull out that planning sheet for the day and I know exactly what charts I need. The weather forecast and the wind and waves, those are going to be added at the last minute. I can't really predict those too far in advance, so I don't want to necessarily put those in. But then I'm going to be putting in my time and my elapsed time and my stage. So just to sort of clarify my headings, because they make sense to me, but they may not make sense for everybody. When I'm putting in a travel leg, so at the very beginning, that first line, my time for that leg is going to be 0, 0, 0. All right. No hours and no minutes. My elapsed time at that point is going to be no hours and no minutes. And I'd be putting my latitude and longitude for my starting point. And then what I'm expecting my speed is going to be. And then the distance is going to be to the latitude and longitude, which is going to be in the second line. So my first starting point, lat long, is going to be on the first line. And I'm going to be going to that second lat long. And I'm going to be traveling at a certain speed to get there, a certain distance on my true magnetic or compass heading. And that's going to take me a certain amount of time. So that time for that first leg is what would go in that time column. And then I would add that to any time that I'd done previously with my elapsed time. So what I'm doing is my first column of the time is the time for that specific leg. The second column is giving me a full run time of how long is it taking me to go through and do this. Now, you can do this really quickly and easily by going on to your favorite navigation planning tools such as Garmin Navionics, Aquamap, whatever, and putting in each stage. And as you go from one stage to the next, it will tell you what you're doing. Let's just take a quick look at that as a reminder, in case we had forgot that part. Where did we go? Camera, iPad. All right. So if we take a look as an example, we were saying, well, we want to go from Nanaimo. And so our first leg is we're going to be starting at, whoops, don't want to do that. Let's get rid of that current position. So if we're starting at Townsite Marina is our first leg, and we're going to go down Newcastle Channel. So we're going to work our way out to here. So we put that in, and that is going to tell us, if we take a look on the left-hand side, it shows us that our start latitude and longitude was 49 degrees, 10.756 minutes north, 123 degrees, 56.491 west. And then it shows me my second latitude, which is 49 degrees, 12.146. And then it says that that distance is 1.5 nautical miles, and it'll take me 17 minutes and 26 seconds based on my planned speed that I put in. And then just above that, it shows us that that length of that trip is 1.5 nautical miles, going to take 17 minutes and 26 seconds, and I'm going to use 0.7 liters of fuel. Now, if I then wanted to add another leg, I could just simply go and say, well, now I'm going to go to there. And so if we look on the left-hand side of that column, it now shows that for that next leg, it puts my latitude and longitude, and that leg is going to be 1.4 nautical miles, and it's going to take me 16 minutes and 5 seconds. And then below that, it tells me what is the total nautical miles and time from my start. And so this is giving me my total distance and time as we go. And then if I wanted to say, and then we're going to go out over here, then it's giving me my next leg. And so on the left-hand side, it's going to give you each particular leg as you're working your way along to see what you've got on that, that key information. And so you can always go back to your different waypoints, and you can either delete a waypoint or you could move a waypoint. If you're like, well, let's change this angle a little bit, and you can adjust that. And then you would need to go back and take a look at your actual plan or the route that you've created as you go from that perspective. So that's the way that we sort of go about filling in that initial planning sheet as we work our way along. But of course, you could always do the same thing using paper charts and going through and doing your plan as we mentioned. So that's the first two steps of your daily plan. And then we're going to calculate our speed and distance, either using our navigation tools or our various chart tools that we've got. And we're going to note the headings for each of the stage. So this is where we want to get our paper charts out, because that's the only place we're going to be able to get our variation. And we want to make sure that we're getting our deviation from our compass card. And in the special considerations we've got, you want to make sure that you note the window for timing through the passes. So what is your earliest arrival that you can go through, what slack is, and what is your latest arrival that you can still successfully make that pass. So knowing what your window is, so that if you arrive early, you're not wasting your time sitting and waiting if it's going to be an acceptable level as we go through. So we have had a question that has popped in. I did see it, Steve, but we were in the middle. Steve is asking that if we're booking marinas for overnight stays around the Salt Spring Island, how many months should you book in advance in general? It depends on the weekend and the marina, quite honestly. Some of them are going to book up a little bit earlier. And particularly on long weekends, and particularly on days when there may be race events going on or other events that are happening. What you'll find as well is, like, if you're at the marina in Ganges, they may book up more on Friday nights because it's quite popular for people to go up on Friday and then go to the market on Saturday morning in the summer. Likewise, you may find anchorage, if you're just anchoring down by Brentwood Bay, if you're just south of there by where Bouchard Gardens are, particularly. There's, obviously, the earlier the better, but, there's no one blanket thing. I know what my plans are for the summer, so I tend to book my times relatively early, so that I know that when I'm going to need to be at a marina, that I've got the space available. But you always have backups. There's always lovely anchorages that you can have. You just sort of need to make note of that. So just to give you an example on how this daily planning sheet translates out, this is an example of one for a navigation going from Maple Bay to Silva Bay, the one we looked at on the charts. And we see there that on the first one, we've got our elapsed time is 000. And then we've got the latitude and longitude. We were making our plan on the basis of a speed going 5 knots. We've got the distance for that first leg, our true heading, which we got from our actual charts, the variation, which we got from the charts. So that gave us our magnetic heading, our deviation, which we then got from our compass card and our compass heading, and making a note over in the special considerations of which chart are we using for that leg. And then when we went to the second line, which was going to be waypoint number 1. As you can see, the 1 in the side, it shows that that leg was going to be 17 minutes. So the elapsed time was 17 minutes. And then we have the details. Now you'll notice that on this particular sheet, there's a check mark next to each of those latitudes and longitudes. That's because we were using the process where we took our daily plan and we were manually entering our latitude and longitude into our chart plotter as we were going along that day. And so as we put our next one in and it was entered into our chart plotter as far as our next step that we were going to, we would simply tick off the latitude and longitude, knowing that we're done that one. We're on to the next one. So this is a practical example of what we've been talking about using the daily planning sheets. Now, on the day of travel, you need to make sure that you check the marine forecast. If you go onto the Environment Canada site and under the marine, they've got a forecast, they've got weather buoy data and land station data, as well as a weather synopsis. So all three of those, looking at those different tabs, are going to be valuable to help give you an idea about what's going on, and always making sure that you're monitoring what you may be getting into. And if you remember previously, we provided you with the phone number where you could contact a marine meteorologist and get more specific details on what was going to be happening. Now, you also want to check what's going to be happening with regards to the wind, the waves, and the current that's being forecast, because stuff can change. And so this is where, if you're using Predict Wind, take a look and see when it was last updated, because it's updated a couple times a day rather. So you need to see, are we going to get a new update in 30 minutes? In which case you might want to hang out, or was it just updated an hour ago? You can also get some currents within the navigation app of your choice that you may have, or winds. Other apps such as Windy, etc. I tend to use Predict Wind and Predict Current as my main sort of defaults in knowing what's going to be happening as far as my planning, both long-term and in advance as well. You can also, if you've got the Orca, you can use that, particularly if you're planning to be wanting to sail as opposed to wanting to go by power. And the chart that you see over there on the right, that is from windfinder.com, which gives you information about what's happening. And remember that a lot of the navigation apps will give you detail that takes a look at what is the difference between, or give you warnings when you've got a wind versus wave situation that is coming into play. So you know that that's going to be a bit of an issue for you on that day. So you've got that daily planning sheet, and that daily planning sheet is where you've got a really clear picture. Where are you going to go? What time should you be there? And one of the key reasons why we do that planning sheet, particularly if we're going on a fairly long journey and we've got a passage. So say we're coming up from, Sydney and we're going to be going through Dodd Narrows. Well, we need to have a pretty good idea of, at certain checkpoints along the way, what time should we be getting there to make sure we're still on track to get to Dodd. Because if you happen to be going slower than what you had planned, and you're not traveling as fast as what you had planned, so you're not going to get there, you need to know when you may need to step up the RPMs on your engine to get a little bit more speed, or you may need to bail out at Porlier if you've looked at that as a bailout option if you don't get to Dodd, or start thinking about, if we're not going to make it through Dodd, where are we going to anchor for the night? So where do we want to be getting ourselves in position? So that's why we do that daily planning sheet. So we've got a guide to know where should we be an hour and a half after we've left. Are we on pace? From this point, how much time should it take us to get to Dodd or to get to our destination? Are we on pace? So we can correct as necessary, as early as necessary, to really sort of drive that. You also want to make sure on your daily log sheet, which is what I've got on the screen there, this is where we transfer the information from the planning sheet, but this is also going to have my trip log numbers, the date, start location, end location, who's on board the boat, the engine hours at the start, at the end, my fuel at the start, and at the end, my water tanks, my black water tanks, my propane, all of that is going to be key. And this is where we're going to be making notations on this anytime we've done a major course change. So anytime we've done a major course change, we put a new entry line in, new latitude and longitude. How did we determine that position? What's our speed at that point in time? On this sheet, distance is my total distance traveled. So this is sort of the cumulative distance that I have. And then we would have our magnetic heading from our instruments. Then using our deviation card, we'd be able to put our compass heading, and I would put down, are we under sail or power, or are we motor sailing in my case? If we're not making a change in direction, we still want to make a notation every 30 or 60 minutes, depending upon the length that you're traveling, because this is the sheet that if all of a sudden things go south and we lose our electronics, this is the sheet that's going to say where was our last known position so that we can transfer that onto our paper charts, and with our daily plan showing us our latitude and longitudes and where we were going, we can immediately just break our paper charts out of our bag and we can put a heading on and start going in that particular heading because we know what our compass heading is from our various waypoints. And we can incorporate, our backup handheld compass or our backup GPS if we've got an Apple Watch as an example with our latitude and longitude, our tablets if they're going to give us our speed over ground, our phone, any of these things would be used as backups at that particular point. So that's the key thing when we're putting this information in, and in the comments section, this is where I would be putting details such as, had to wait at Dodd for the orcas to go through, which happened twice one summer. They always pick slack to go through, which is annoying when you've got a tight window and you got to sit there and wait for them to get through. But, they only let us play in their ocean, so it's okay. So any animal encounters, any weather situations that have happened, any things of note that have occurred at that particular stage, I would want to make notation. For example, if winds were coming up or whatever and I needed to reef the sails in, I would make a notation in there that I was putting one reef in or two reefs in or whatever the case may be. And so this is where on your daily planning sheet, this is where that information sort of comes through. You've got the time of day when you're going through at that particular point, your latitude and longitude. These were all GPS readings, and the information as we went from power to sail to motor sail back to power, and then our notation on the bottom, which gives us our total nautical miles that we traveled, as well as our hours under motor and our fuel used. And it's those two calculations on the bottom that we use to edit our end hours on the page and our ending fuel. And so this is then your physical log sheet, and you've got fillable PDF versions of this that have been provided. So you could then do like I do and transfer this handwritten data, which may or may not be the easiest to read, into the fillable PDF and have that available electronically as your exact travel that you did. And that's always useful both for records, so you know what you were doing on a particular day, but also if you want to go back and redo a particular route, you've already gone through and done that planning. So any particular questions on that rehash? We tried to sort of want to make sure that you had the key details of what we'd been doing and what tools we would use going through the whole thing from the planning stage to the actual implementation on the day. So if you do have questions, just type them into the chat and put a Q. And while we're doing that, let's take a look at some of the things that we're going to be taking a look at if we're going to be doing a northern route, if we're going to be taking a look at a plan and look at some of the information that we may want to be aware of and how we would put all this together. And then once we sort of look at a little bit of that, we'll let you go for the evening. It's been wonderful to have you so far. So let's go and take a look at the iPad where we've got the information. Where do we got? Whoops. All right. So if we take a look and we're going to be making a plan and say, hey, well, we want to go up and we're going to be taking a look at Campbell River. And we're going to say, all right, we're going to go through Campbell River, but you've got to be cautious because just off of here, you can get a lot of current cranking in as you're working your way along. Just coming into Campbell River, you may have 6-7 knots of current on your approach to Campbell River. So if you haven't done a good plan and hadn't looked at that information, then you could be sitting there and going, oh, I'm concerned about what's going to be happening up here, as we go through Seymour Narrows. But if you don't consider the timing of what's going to be happening down here as we go up to Campbell River, if we take a look at the readings off of Cape Mudge right now, we've got 5.5 knots heading north. So if you're going into that, and if you've got a boat such as mine that, runs 5.5, 6 knots, you're moving. But on the other hand, if we were looking at doing this, tomorrow afternoon at, say, we were going to be trying to get to Campbell River around 2:30, we've got a 6-knot current going against us. So we need to make sure that we're timing our passage to come into this area. And so Garmin Boating and other apps will have areas where there is a current concern. They will generally have those arrows that you can highlight on, like we've done here, to see what is that passage going to be as you go when you're sort of looking at that information. So I can say, okay, if I want to make sure that I'm not trying to fight more than 2 knots, all right, maybe I want to sit there and say, I need to wait until 5:02 before I'm going to be able to start heading up to get myself to the marina at Campbell River. And so even though it's not a narrows like Seymour Narrows or Dodd Narrows, this is what would be considered a choke point as far as I've got to be concerned of what the current is at that particular spot. And so my planning and my timing has to make sure that I'm going to hit that at a spot when I'm going to be able to go through. Otherwise, you may be running at 6 knots with your engine on 2,500 RPM, and you're looking down at your speed over ground, and hopefully it's a 0 or 0.1 and not a negative number. Negative speed over grounds are not good. So you want to be paying cognizant attention as far as what you've got. And because of the current that's coming through here, we do have a current reading that's off Cape Mudge, and then further up, we also have a current reading off of Orange Point, where we can see what we've got. So right now off Orange Point, we've got 5.4 going north. And then as we move up and we get ourselves, we can take a look just before we get right at Race Point. As we're getting closer to Seymour Narrows, we are now at a 7.5 knot heading north. And then as we get up, going through Seymour Narrows, we are sitting there that Seymour Narrows right now is at 11 knots. And so this is where we can see that it was 11.5, and then it's going to be 11.48, 12, 11, 12, 13, so you really need to be cognizant of what you're looking at for where things are, and making sure that you've got that set as you go. So if we were going to be going and say we've managed to get ourselves to Campbell River and we've got ourselves parked there. Okay, no, don't go current position. Let's flip that around. So if we're going from Campbell River and I want to sort of say, okay, if I'm going to be going from there and be hitting the start of the Narrows, that based on my boat information is going to be 7.4 nautical miles, and it's going to take me an hour and 27 minutes to go through there. Now, bearing in mind that these times that are being provided in Garmin boating are not taking into account your time and what the currents are going to be, because it's not looking at a specific time. It's just looking and saying, just like the charts, if I'm going A to B, how long will that take me? The currents are going to impact those times. And that's where you then, once you've got the estimate of with nothing impacting this, how long is it going to take me to get there and do that run? And so in this case, we'd be looking at an hour and 27, burning 3.5 liters of fuel. Our timing is going to come later. So then we can say, all right, we get through Seymour Narrows. So we put another waypoint in, and then we come up and say, all right, let's get ourselves up to here. And then we go, all right, cool. Let's see what we've got. Let's bring ourselves up to this spot. And then, maybe we're going to head up. Just take a look. Okay. Right. And so depending upon where you're going to go, if you want to sort of find a place to stop for the evening. So maybe we want to go from there to Blind Channel. So then we can say, all right, from this point, we'll go there, work our way along, come up, and then we're going to turn up Main Point. And so at each of these stages, we would be making note of how long is it going to take us to get to that particular point. And based on our current, that we're dealing with, is it going to be moving in our favor? Is it going to be moving against? What window are we going to have? Because if you've got, remember when we talked about the rule of thirds on current, within the first hour, that current is going to be 50% of its max. So if you're dealing with a 14 knot current going through Seymour Narrows, within 1 hour of slack, your current is going to be 7 knots. And so this is why in this Campbell River through to Seymour Narrows and moving up the channel, we've got feel as you're moving through your path that says at my speed, and what will I be at this point? How long will I be? And so one of the things that I find is handy to do if you're going through an area such as this that's got a lot of current is put a waypoint in right near where they're giving you current data, because that helps you from your timing perspective. Are you ahead of time? Are you behind time? What's happening with the current that you're dealing with, and give you a really clear picture. So I always try to sort of do that, even if it adds more waypoints. I like to sort of match a waypoint up every time we've got a current situation that we need to be aware of. And then we put our last stop here at Blind Channel. So what that's telling us is that from Seymour Narrows, which is where did we put a fresh point in Seymour Narrows, or did we go from Campbell River? Can't remember right now. Oh, we went from Campbell River. So for us to get from Campbell River through Seymour Narrows to Blind Channel, providing that, all things considered, so we're not looking at the impact of current either for or against, we're going to be looking at a 30-mile trip that will take us 6 hours. and we'll use 14.4 liters of fuel for us to go through there. So once we've got that figured out, we really want to know on our daily plan at each of these steps on the day that we're planning to travel, if separation head is waypoint number 3, what are we going to be dealing with? What's the window of the current there? So if we've got 5 knots or 4 knots, we definitely want to avoid 4 or 5 knots going against, so that we can have a really clear picture of are we able to make our pass through here. And in some cases, on some days, for my particular boat, if Seymour Narrows is going from like a 14 knot flood to a 13.6 ebb, your slack window is going to be so narrow in there, and the impact on all of those other currents along the journey is going to have a huge impact that you definitely don't want to be going through there when you're going to be fighting that current, or it's going to get really, really ugly. And so then you may sort of make the decision, we're going to go around and go through Ucanta Rapids, because of the fact that it's not necessarily optimal to be able to go through there. However, if you've done this planning and you've looked at this, it is possible that everything works out beautifully. It depends on the day, and it depends on the particular tide that's going to be there. For example, I've got a trip this summer that's going to be up there where I've got clients, and we're going to be coming back to Campbell River from Blind Channel one day. We're going to we'll come over in the morning slack at Seymour Narrows. We've dropped them back in Campbell River. And there's going to be then a couple of hours for me to take care of reprovisioning, refueling, topping up the water tanks, and then turning around, and I can actually get back through Seymour Narrows at the next slack tide and make it back to Blind Channel while I'm still in nautical twilight. It'll be just after sunset, but it'll still be in the early stages of nautical twilight. So I have the ability to go through Seymour Narrows twice in that one day because the timing lines up. It's not an aggressive high or low. So, but if you don't do this work and you don't take a look at these plans, you have no idea. And you can get yourself into a lot of trouble in particular areas, that you've got as you're working your way along. So we've had a couple of questions that have popped up. So let's just take a quick look at those, and then we'll come back to our plan. There was a question that says, is CanBoat or any other organized group involved in lobbying the federal government for adopting electronic chart standards? Well, the federal government is working their way towards electronic chart standards. So lobbying them to do something that they're already working on may not necessarily be as active. We could lobby them to try to be quicker, but, won't know how effective that is because it's taking time, but they are working and moving. The priority right now with the government and their electronic chart standards and moving things over, the priority is the commercial vessel electronic charts, because that's their mainstay that's got to be functioning as they're making their transitions on that. And then once the commercial is taken care of, then they'll start taking a look at the recreational side. But their priority is the commercial side of things. And so that's where they're going on that side. So yeah, there's a lot of, electronic is better, providing you're doing the updates and you're supplementing it with the tools. The problem is you've got to make sure that you're using electronic charts that are created and provided by CHS. Because if we look at Navionics, if we look at Garmin Boating, Aquamap, all of them, they resource some of their data from CHS, but they're not under any obligation to make their charts identical
to them. So they may add some details that their users may want that are more appropriate for fishing. They may leave other details out that they think just clutter things up and are not necessarily relevant, but they may be. So that's the reason why the government says that all of these are okay from copyright, but they do not meet the legal requirements for being carried on board as having the appropriate charts for the area as required in Canada as we go. We had another question from Neil that was saying, last year during the electronic setup of one of the units, asked which depth datum to use, chart or others. The ones that is there is in Canada. I would definitely be using the chart datum because that's going to match up, and knowing that, you know, Canada is giving you they're giving you the conservative pathway, unlike the States. So like in Canada, when it's showing you and says, this is your depth, that is the shallowest that you're likely to experience there unless there's something really, really weird. So in a normal situation, you're going to have more depth than that. On the problem is in the States, they take an average. It's not the maximum. So you can have situations in the States where you've got in your books negative tides because 0 is not low enough. It's going to go negative. And the same problem comes into play when you're looking at high tides. It may tell you this is the height, but the tide may be higher, which would be reducing your clearance between the top of your mast and wires or bridges or overhangs of something. So you always need to be cognizant of the fact that Canadian charts are erring on the side of caution. American charts are not. And so what is your chart datum has to be looked at on the chart to understand what you're dealing with from there. So particularly in Canada, I would be using chart datum, but be aware that if it's using American charts, that chart datum is going to change. And I need to realize that whether I'm using the electronic charts or my plotting tool that we go. All right. So we've had a question that says, how do you compare velocity made good against my pro forma vessel speed? Well, that's going to depend on either doing more complex calculations, like taking a look at what is the current doing as where we go. And that's where if you take a look at your speeds, depending upon the instrumentation that you've got your speed over ground. That is going to be letting you know what is your actual speed that you're progressing from, and that's calculated from the GPS. You also may have a speed indicator on your instruments, which is going from the paddle wheel under your boat, which is talking about the flow of water. And so this is where my concern when I'm doing my plans is I'm thinking about what is my speed over ground as my 5 knots that I'm looking at. And I'm hoping that my planning and my awareness of the currents and what I'm dealing with is going to average out that the time that I may be getting a boost will compensate for the time I'm being restricted, or giving me even more of advantage from there, because I'm always checking my currents and seeing what is going to be changing from there and looking at predict current and saying, you know, what time should I be leaving to try to make sure I'm minimizing the restrictions and impact. And that's also why on the daily planning sheets, I'm indicating over on the side, when I get to waypoint number 4, my elapse time from when I left my start point, if it says it should be an hour and I get there and it's taken me an hour and 20, I know that I'm not progressing at the same rate that I should be. So I can take a look at what I can do to adjust that, pick up my RPMs if I've got that, or look for a bailout if I'm not going to be able to make my destination or a choke point that's there. But that's one of the things that really becomes important, is to understanding that your speed over ground is based on GPS readings, and your speed may be based on your DST or your speed indicator, your paddle wheel that you've got on your boat that's letting you know what the water flow is, where the most important thing is not how fast is the water going past my hull, because that may be a very strong current, but I might have a 6, my speed might be 6, but my speed over ground might be 0.1. That's not a good day for getting me to my destination. And so that's the reason why we do all these fillings out and we break all these tools out, so that we know what we're dealing with, and we've got all of those key pieces of information as early as possible on our journey, so that if our timing is off, if we're early, then we can maybe back off a little bit, maybe drop our revs down a little slower and not really be as concerned or whatever. But again, it's always done as a guide, because as a sailboater, my goal is to get the sails up and turn the engines off and have some silence as often as I can. And so I need to be aware of sort of, if I'm going to be lollygagging on attack, as I get to those certain waypoints, how much of a window do I have from that waypoint before, even if I've got good wind, if my speed to my destination or my speed to my waypoint is not happening and I'm slowing down, I may need to put the sails in, switch to the Iron Genoa, and start getting myself to that destination before I run out of time, if I'm on a point-to-point situation, or I'm concerned about currents that I'm going to be dealing with that are going to be coming up. And that's where looking at the tools and knowing the details that you've got are going to be so powerful for helping to get everything in place. So if we look at predict current as an example, let me just flip back here for a sec. So if we look at predict current and we go back to our home tab here, if we take a look at, say, if we're going up, I've got some of these sets. So if I'm taking a look at the off of Campbell River, so this is where I can take a look and say, oh, lovely. All right. So if we take a look off of Campbell River, this is showing us what is our wind going to be, what is the current, what is the wave action going to be, and what is the tide going to be happening. So if I take a look tomorrow, as we were looking at that particular spot at 4 o'clock, what we're seeing is we're dealing with wind at 4 knots, we're dealing with current at 4.92 knots, and as we get a little bit later, we start to see some lovely little red things. If we take a look at that red warning, this is telling us that this is a wind versus current warning. And Campbell River North, wind versus current is bad in a lot of areas, but through there, it's treacherously bad. So, avoiding any of those specific warnings. And that's one of the things that I like about the predict current and its alignment with predict wind being the same company, is it's going to give you those indications to let you know what's happening with the wind and the current, and being able to sort of make a plan for where you've got. So like here, if we take a look and we go, well, we'll wait till it's not wind versus current. Well, at 7 a.m. the next morning, we're dealing with 19 knots of wind, 7 knots of current, and 4-foot seas, 4-foot waves at 4-second separation. So, definitely not necessarily a place that everybody would be comfortable and happy with being in that particular spot. So this gives you a relatively interesting idea. And I just want to show you one thing here. because what you're dealing with, particularly with changes in as you're dealing with floods and ebbs, if you're looking at things, so if I take a look, if I put a new spot in here, so if I go back home, and if we put Seymour Narrows, so if I go to add a new location, let's see if we have Seymour. No, Seymour Arm, no. So we'll have to do it the old school way. So we scroll out, zip our way up until we find Campbell River. There's Campbell River, so yay. And then we find ourselves at Seymour Narrows. So if I save that location and we call it Seymour, well, that's all. We'll leave it at that. So, and then we save that. If we take a look at the map for that particular area, this is where it gets really interesting. So we're trying to take a look and see what's going on. And so this is where the map view of heavy areas such as this can be so powerful for helping you figure things out. Because right now we've got pretty strong on everything heading north. But if we move to 1036, this is where we've got that point of transition, and we've got a flow coming from the north, and right about there, we've got a flow coming from the south, and the north are meeting. This is why you get those little wave markings on the chart at this particular spot, because when you can see those two in an orange and bright red, that is not necessarily a happy place to be as you're taking a look at that details as you've got going on. So this is where you can really start to see opportunities for where do you want to be positioned and where do you not want to be positioned. So here you'll see that the more over to the northern part of the channel here as you're coming around, it's going to be drawing you more into the north. You're going to be eddying around, as opposed to if you're closer to the southern edge of the point, you're going to have a much easier flow as you work your way up the channel. And so that's where Predict Current is a really great tool for you to be able to see what is anticipated to be happening based on the wind and the current and the tides and everything that's going on, to give you the smoothest, safest passage through these areas. And, particularly, if you're Campbell River heading north, going through some of those areas, these details could be extremely important for helping you, get a clear picture of what's going on as far as your path. All right. So that's where we wanted to go with things today. We've covered a lot of details over the last 4 weeks. Again, as we mentioned, I will be working on more additional information and additional resources that are going to be popped up on the website. And so make sure you save that information and have that available. If you do have any particular questions now in the future down the road, please feel free to reach out to me either through my communications at CanBoat-Nanaimo.ca or at Lyle@LatitudeSailing.ca. And if there's anything we can do to assist down the road, remember, there's all sorts of great opportunities and resources available online through the variety of the great CanBoat programs, as well as those that we offer through Nautic Ed and are able to do the on-the-water evaluations and training for you on that. So thank you all very much for joining us over the last month. Hopefully there's been at least one or two little nuggets of information that might be able to be valuable and helpful to you down the road. And most importantly, help make your boating safer. That's one of the key things that we want to make sure that is being taken care of. And that's the reason why Latitude Sailing and CanBoat Nanaimo partnered together for this last month to bring some of this information to you, because we want everybody to have a wonderful, positive summer on the water, a very safe, positive experience on the water. And let's all enjoy this wonderful environment that we've got here in BC and take a look. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. If you do have any comments or thoughts or things about what we've gone through, please feel free to type them into the chat. We are going to go back and take a look at them, and we appreciate all the positive feedback and comments that you've got on that. So thanks, great, everybody. Have yourself a wonderful week, a wonderful evening, and get your boat on the water and get spending some time. My first weekend's done, and it was lovely out there and nice and quiet. Not a lot of competition, but it was great. So thanks very much, everybody. Have fun, take care, be safe, and enjoy your boating.